video, we're going to continue exploring using AWS to serve up our static content, but we're going to solve two problems this time that we didn't really address when we served the files out of the S3 bucket. One was we were only serving the files through HTTP, not HTTPS, which is bad practice nowadays. And two, we never really talked about cache control headers. And with React apps in particular, you need to be very conscious about how you're caching your files for best performance. So first thing I'm going to do is, and I already did this already, I went into Route 53 and I purged out all of the entries we created previously. So at this point, we should be back to just having just the two default entries that come in, right? The SOA and the name service. And then I also went in and I deleted out the NES, the S3 buckets I created previously. So that's the first step. Now, the reason we're doing this is we're going to change sort of the tactics about how we're going to do this. We're going to use CloudFront to actually serve up the files. And that just requires different configuration. So the first thing we need to do, though, is we are going to recreate that bucket. And the name here is not as critical as it was before, but maybe for just naming conventions, I'm going to stick with naming it after the website, and to-dos are us.com. I'm only going to do one now. I'm not having, unlike before where we had two buckets, we only have one bucket. So to-dos are us. Okay, so I have one bucket. The next step is we're going to upload our files like we did earlier. So I'm going to do that. Upload. And I believe these are the actual files I want. Yep. Upload. Okay, I think they're all there. Now, there is one change I'm going to make here. I'm going to be very conscious about cache control. And where you set that is you set that on the S3, the objects themselves, on the metadata on each of these objects. So the first set of files I want to deal with are all the ones that are the root here, right? And basically, I don't want really the browser or any CDN, CloudFront, to cache any of these files at all, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the files, but I'm going to turn off static, so I'm picking everything but the static folder, and I go to Actions, Change Metadata, Cache Control, and then I have to look this up every time. So I have a bookmark here. Cache control headers. And in the bottom here, they give you two core examples. So it's no store if I want it to not cache. So no store, save, change. Okay, and now the opposite is I want to cache these essentially, the rest of the files essentially indefinitely. So let me turn off everything. Pick everything in static. Oh, did not mean to go. Hang on. I'm clicking too close. Okay, so everything in static by just clicking static. I want to change its metadata. Cache control. And this time I want to cache essentially indefinitely, which I think this is a year, and that's the maximum you can cache things anyway. So that's essentially indefinitely. Okay. Save. Change. Okay. So now I set my cache control headers. Again, I'm caching everything in static indefinitely and everything else essentially not caching. Okay. The next thing we need to do is we need to serve this. That deals with the kind of the caching side of it. Now we have to deal with the fact that we need HTTPS. And we're going to use a different service here. It's called Certificate Manager to create our certificates for our domain, because we haven't done that yet. So this is going to create the secure SSL, TSL certificates for us, right? And the way you do that is you just say provision certificates. We're requesting a new certificate. Did I not click this? There we go. Okay. Then you need to add domain names here. Okay. And so we're going to want two. We want the naked domain, which is going to be todos are us.com. Okay, so todosrs.com, and we want to add www.todosrus.com. That's essentially what we're going to be serving up those two domains off of our out of our bucket, basically. Todosrus.com and www. Okay, next. And one of the things you need to do with domains is to validate you actually control that domain, and we're going to use DNS validation method for that. Basically amounts to you have to make some modifications to your DNS tables, which we can. So we'll do that. We're not going to do any tagging. That's basically what we're going to do. Todosrus.com. Yeah, that looks right. Confirm and request. Now, one of the things, so basically there's some instructions here on how to, see if I, right. So basically say I need to go into my DNS and then putting in this record, a CNAME record that points to this value. It's basically kind of like a password, like a pair of credentials for the validate that you actually own the domain. Now, good news is we're using Route 53, so I can basically push a button and it will do it for me. And I can do the same thing for this subdomain. Push the button, create, right? And then I hit continue. Now, it's still waiting, it's waiting to check. All I have to do is just refresh this window, and at some point it's going to come clean. It's going to read the fact that, okay, I'm going to pause the video. It might take like 5 minutes for Amazon to detect that those records are there. So I'm going to pause the video for a second. A minute or so. I just refreshed the browser, and it came back with a status of issued, and both were successful. Okay, so now I've got a certificate. The next thing is we're going to go ahead and create a CloudFront distribution that's basically going to use this certificate, use the S3 bucket to basically serve up the files to the public, right? So we switch gears, we go over to here, we go to CloudFront. And what you do is you create what's called a distribution. We want a web distribution. The origin domain name, basically the origin is where the files are coming from, and we're coming from our S3 bucket. We're going to serve the whole thing. Now, one of the things we want to do here is we want, right, this is what we want to do. One of the things we want to do is restrict the access to the bucket. So basically the bucket itself has no rights. We didn't do any security on it at all, right? So that means it's basically locked down, and the only person who can access those files is me. So we're going to leave it that way, but we are going to have CloudFront be able to go and read those files out of that bucket. Now, if you have not done this before, you would have to create a new identity. In this case, I actually did an example of this. So last time I actually created one of these identities for this bucket, right? It's basically credentials that let me read into that bucket. And see, grant read permission on bucket. No, and I also just because I create the identity or use the identity doesn't mean the bucket has the policies. So I'm going to hit yes here because I actually don't want to have to like figure out how to do this myself. So I'm going to have it update my bucket to allow this user to log into that. Okay, and we'll double check that in shortly. Scroll down. Let's see. We want to redirect. So if there's any HTTP request, we want it to go to HTTPS, right? Because we only want to serve this out of HTTPS. Not going to change anything here. Nothing down here. Right. So here, in terms of object caching, we're going to rely on the origins cache headers, right? Those are the things that we set earlier to manage the cache behavior, right? And we're going to leave these defaults because we've already set the caching. These only come into play if we didn't actually use the cache control headers. Okay, so we're going to leave those alone. I believe we can leave everything alone here. We're going to distribute it across the world. Oh, we do need to make a change here. So we do want to serve this up using two domain names. We want todosrus.com and www.todosrus.com, right? So those are the names that we want to serve it up. And we actually need a certificate because we actually want HTTPS to work. And from here, we can actually find our certificate we just created earlier. Right? We're going to leave all this default here. Not going to change anything here. Not going to change anything here. Yeah, I think we're ready to go. I'm going to create distribution. Now this is going to take, these distributions take a while to build. So I am going to pause the video again and we'll go poke around afterwards and see what's going on. About 10 minutes or so, and I can see now that my distribution has been deployed. So that's good. Let's do a little bit of poking around first before we test this. So one of the things I wanted to see was if I go back into a couple things got done for me, and I wanted to just observe them. One was when we set up the certificate, it actually said it created some entries in my zones. So let's see what it did. And it did create these entries. See these two bottom entries here? These were created automatically when we tried to do the certificates for the HTTP certificates, or HTTPS, TLS certificates. The second thing it also did, automatically, we had checked a box to automatically update our bucket policy. So if I go to S3, todosrus, I believe it's under permissions, and bucket policy. So I didn't add this. So what this did was when I created a distribution, I told it that I wanted this CloudFront origin access user to have read access get objects on this bucket, and that got created automatically here. Okay, so now that we've kind of seen all the things that have changed, let's do one more change to support our solution, and that is we have to go to a route. We have to actually create the DNS entries that point our domain, our root domain, and our subdomain to the CloudFront. So hosted zones, and we need to create a record set. This is going to be the root one, right? We want it to be an alias, and we want it to part. Now the good news, it should already be here, right? So I want to point this to the CloudFront distribution. Why is this going to mark here? Oh, they're just telling you that, you know, and we did.
make sure. Confirm that the specified distribution includes a required alternate domain. Yeah, we did that earlier. So we hit create. And then we got to create one more, which is www. And we want alias. And then we want to create it. Okay, so if all goes well, which we'll see, to-dos, no. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to troubleshoot because I thought this was going to work. It worked earlier. That there was an easy fix for this. So what's happening right now, if I go to HTTPS to-dos.rs.com, I'm getting this error message. And it took me a minute to figure out what was going on. Right now, so you notice that I'm not asking for a particular file. I'm just asking for the name. Now it turns out if I just actually type in index.html, the whole thing works. Okay. So what's happening is there's a setting that I forgot to do in the distribution. Let's see if I can change it on the fly here. There was one part of this that says default root object. So this, if you click on this, it says the object you want CloudFront to return, for example, index.html, when the viewer points to your root URL. So I never gave it a file name here. There we go. And now I can say yes, edit. Okay. And I don't know if that takes, how much time that takes to distribute. Let's see if it, so let me pause the video. That change takes a few minutes to propagate. So let me pause the video. Deployed in about 10 minutes. And now let's validate that this now works. I go to HTTPS to-dos.rs.com. Okay, that worked, right? And just for giggles, I'll also validate that www. Now, one thing's a little confusing. When I go to www, you notice that the URL looks like it just says to-dos.rs.com. I just noticed Chrome must be doing this. But behind the scenes, it's still www. It's just hiding the www for me. So it's probably a good practice nowadays to make sure that you have naked domains if you're serving up www domains, because the browser will automatically hide it. Now, one of the problem I just noticed too is this particular React app doesn't do a React router, but a lot of times with React router, you're doing things like, welcome. You'll have pages like this, and what's supposed to actually happen is supposed to just really serve up you the index.html with this path. And right now, it's actually just giving an error, right? So there is a way to fix this. So let's see if we can fix this. I am going to, and this will be the last thing we need to fix for anything to do, hopefully, with, before I do that though, let's look at cache headers, actually. I'm almost afraid to look at this too, but so let me bring up my developer tools, network, reload, and what I should be seeing here is I want to see these cache control headers on for example, this. I should see a cache control header of no store, which is what I wanted. It's not storing it. And on this chunk file, I want to see a cache control. It is here. So our cache control headers are working as expected. The index.html file is not being cached, but everything under static is basically being cached, which is like all these JavaScript with these hashes in them. Okay, so that's working. So the last thing we want to do is make sure that this thing will work with paths. And
And the way we do that is, and I'll have to set it up, and then is under error pages. We need to create, it's basically, this is a page where you can tell it to send different pages depending on if your origin returns errors. In this case, 400 errors. So I'm going to create a page. If it's on 404, not found, right? And I'll leave the error caching the default, but I want to customize, and then I want index for example, path and file name. Well, I would do index.html, and I want to give it an OK. So I want to basically, if it doesn't find the file, I wanted to send it to index.html with an OK. And I was reading an article. I'm going to do one more here. There's a forbidden, and I'm not, well, let me do the same thing, index.html. Okay, so an article I read suggested that the error message we may get back from the S3 may not be a 404. It may be actually a 403. So playing it safe, doing a 404 or 403. So create. And now I'm betting this is now probably pushing out again. So I'm going to let me pause the video again. Distribution went out, and I actually checked already, but we'll check it together. So here's the domain, right? And the validation would be, if I just go to some random 1, 2, 3, and this actually now serves up the index file on that path, which is our expected behavior. And so this would allow me to use something like React Router with history routing, essentially. Okay, so I think we're done with the video. We pretty much have got everything we would need done from a static website delivery kind of covered. HTTPS, cache control headers, and then now we've got also handling of the 404 errors. So that's it.